Well, strap in for the month guys, because this channel is undertaking a massive project, spearheaded by my writer and friend Grievous1138 on Discord. So make sure you send him a message because he is the mastermind behind what we're trying to do for this whole month and into next month as well. Pretty much guys, we are fleshing out the entirety of the Clone Wars and we've got it segmented into a bunch of different chapters. But before we get on the first chapter, I have a foreword from the writer and myself. You fought in the Clone Wars.
You fought in the Clone Wars?
This question was asked by Luke Skywalker in the first Star Wars movie to ever hit theaters, directed at Obi-Wan Kenobi. This question and Kenobi's answer gave the Star Wars universe the base of what makes it so special. The deeply expansive history that lay behind it, and the used universe feel that made George Lucas's story seem all the more real. The opening crawl of what would be renamed Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope provided a setting for Lucas's galaxy far, far away, but it was this exchange that gave the story depth. From that point on, the Clone Wars were important, even if for 25 years next to nothing was known about them. Though they were only mentioned twice in passing, once by Luke and once by Princess Leia, the Clone Wars became frequently mentioned in the expanded universe works that helped bring Star Wars back into wide popularity. They were a grounding for the universe, be it in Timothy Zahn's famous Thrawn trilogy or other lesser-known EU stories. The Clone Wars were always a common anchor, a past event that happened not too long before the events of A New Hope. When Attack of the Clones was released and audiences finally began to learn the story of the Clone Wars, a vast multimedia project began. From the Star Wars Clone Wars animated micro-series and a variety of novels to the Star Wars Republic comics and multiple video games, the 3 years that made up the Clone Wars became the most densely chronicled part of Star Wars lore, up until the release of Revenge of the Sith, and at the time, the completion of the saga. This was only bolstered by yet another multimedia project centered around the TV series Star Wars The Clone Wars. The wave of hype surrounding the Clone Wars is no small part of what got me enthralled with Star Wars in the first place, and ever since the beginning, the Clone Wars have always been the era that I have focused on. But one thing about them has always irked me, the lack of a cohesive timeline. Originally, the Clone Wars had an extremely coherent timeline split into 36 months, but Star Wars The Clone Wars shattered this completely by fitting nowhere on the established timeline. A new timeline was promised, but the promise was never fulfilled, as Disney bought Lucasfilm and cancelled the Clone Wars. Yes, I made a complete timeline of the war with events and even given dates, something that is elaborated at the end of this guide, but a timeline without explanations is to most tedious, and so this guide came to be. Based around the timeline and featuring maps, battle profiles, and a comprehensive overall view of the war, this thoroughly detailed guide combines all Clone Wars elements from both Legends and canon, plus some of my own additions either for greater detail to complete the story or to reconcile the two, and is presented in an in-universe fashion. With all this said, we hope you enjoy, and may the Force be with you, always. When the Clone Wars erupted on Geonosis, a new chapter of galactic history began. Never before had system turned against system in such numbers. Never before, or since, had any droid army come close to rivaling that of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, and nobody expected the arrival of the Republic's highly trained clone army. Modern historians consider the war one of the largest the galaxy has ever faced. It is quite terrifying then to consider that the entire war was merely the endgame of the plot of a Sith Lord. The Clone Wars were a culmination of what now is known as the Sith Grand Plan. This plan can be traced back to the 7th Battle of Ruusan and the end of the New Sith Wars 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. In that battle, scores of Jedi were slain, but the Sith Brotherhood of Darkness perished completely, and it was thought that their kind had been wiped from the galaxy. But it was not so. A Sith Lord named Darth Bane survived, and recast the Lords of the Sith with his rule of 2, one master and one apprentice, no more or less. His line continued for millennia as the Republic entered a new golden age under the Ruusan reformations. One by one, the Sith brought the galaxy ever closer to a war that would tear it asunder, luring megacorporations with promises of power and stirring dissent and corruption in the Senate. It fell, ultimately, to Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious to finish the work of so many Sith before them. In day-to-day guises as Hego Damask of the Intergalactic Banking Clan and Senator Palpatine of the Chomel Sector, they organized assassinations, militarization, and legislation, eventually pushing the Trade Federation to blockade the small planet of Naboo 3 years after the Great Resynchronization. The Battle of Naboo is now seen for what it actually was, the premonition of a war that would consume the entire galaxy. The Trade Federation blockaded and invaded the small world in protest of the taxation of the Outer Rim trade routes. But in truth, there was a more sinister purpose for the blockade: to propel Darth Sidious to the Supreme Chancellery of the Republic on a wave of sympathy and support. In this, Sidious was successful, and he gained something else from the way the Trade Federation was handled afterwards. The galaxy's strongest megacorporations were beginning to distrust the Republic. With the Republic under his rule and Darth Plagueis dead by his hand, Sidious took a new apprentice to replace Darth Maul, who had been defeated on Naboo, Count Dooku, a wealthy nobleman of Sereno and Jedi apostate. Taking the title of Darth Tyrannus in secret, Dooku vanished from the public eye for 8 years and travelled the galaxy sowing the seeds of secession. Dooku reappeared and began the Separatist crisis shortly before the expiration of Palpatine's term as Supreme Chancellor. His newly founded Confederacy of Independent Systems gathered more worlds every day and won the support of the Trade Federation and similar guilds. 2 years later, the Clone Wars began on Geonosis, and with them, the endgame of Sidious's plans. The war was the perfect trap, designed to wipe out the Jedi Order. By fighting it all, the Jedi lost. So too did the galaxy. By the time Dooku began organizing the Separatist movement, the Republic was already effectively splintered. As part of the Ruusan reformations, the Republic dissolved its central military in favor of planetary security forces maintained by individual worlds. However, many remote star systems could not afford strong defense forces, and so it fell to guilds like the Trade Federation to provide protection for these worlds. In exchange for protection, these megacorporations often received the votes of these systems in the Senate, adding to the corruption and gridlock in which Coruscant was already mired. Among many weaker systems of little note, resentment grew for the Republic that could not protect it. These systems were some of the first to rally behind Dooku's separatist movement. On the other end, many stronger worlds gravitated toward Dooku as well, seeing an opportunity to grow their own power. The stage for this was set before Dooku even entered the picture. In the 8 years between his fall to the dark side of the Force and the Raxus Address, Dooku met with the leaders of thousands of star systems and some of the galaxy's largest corporations. Playing on fears set in place by the Sith before him, Dooku began to spread sentiment that the Republic could not protect the systems of the galaxy, using the Battle of Naboo as a prime example. On the other hand, he used the Republic's post-Naboo treatment of the Trade Federation as an example of another sort to the Commerce Guild. Under the Republic, they would face nationalization. Dooku ensured that all was ready by the end of Palpatine's term as Chancellor. 1 week before Palpatine was scheduled to leave office, Dooku appeared before the whole galaxy on Raxus Prime. His agents hacked a holonet transceiver on the world, and the Sith Lord broadcasted a fiery speech condemning the Republic for its corruption and casting the Jedi as over-glorified leg breakers of a tyrannical regime. And then, before the entire galaxy, he declared the secession of 1,000 star systems from the Republic, and the formation of a new government, the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Chaos broke out immediately. Amidst a wave of declarations of secession, the Galactic Senate frantically voted to extend Palpatine's second term as Supreme Chancellor for the duration of the Separatist crisis. Palpatine strongly urged for cool heads and unity, but it was to no avail. Raxus, Agamar, Yukio, Medalorn, Sereno, Yagdal, Geonosis, and Selenon all seceded in short order, bringing thousands of worlds with them. The Republic was hopelessly divided. The Separatist crisis had begun. Some worlds seceded shortly after the Raxus address and would be known over the next few years as rabidly separatist. On the other hand, many Republic worlds, including Kuat and Fondor, both broke ties with the Techno-Union following the Raxus address, and became rabidly loyalist, urging the Senate to recreate the Republic military and declare war on the fledgling CIS. Others, like Corellia and Mandalore, declared neutrality, but the worlds that saw the worst of the Separatist crisis were worlds like Antar and Ancion, worlds now embroiled in fierce civil wars between loyalist and Separatist factions. Antar 4 was the site of one of the most notorious battles in the Separatist crisis, and marked when the crisis truly turned violent. Taking place 18 months after the Raxus address, Antar 4, the moon home to the Gotal species, had come under control of the Gotal Assembly for Separation, which backed the CIS. However, the Antarian Rangers, a Jedi-allied loyalist group, opposed secession and kept the Antar system contested. During the New Year Fete week of that year, however, open violence began. The Roshu Sun, a militant splinter group in the Separatist Assembly, had placed sleeper agents within the Antarian Rangers and activated them. Many of the Rangers were massacred, and those off-world quickly returned home to avenge their fallen comrades. The Republic responded with a Jedi-led assault, which was shredded by Separatist militants. As a counterattack, the Republic fired off several electromagnetic pulses across the moon, overwhelming the Gotal's sensitive head cones and causing extreme pain for the entire population. The Republic retained control of Antar 4, but had lost the support of the Gotals and had shown the galaxy that it was not invincible. Anti-Jedi sentiment began to grow on both sides at this time. Many of the Separatists hated and feared the Jedi, who they saw as kidnappers and the mysterious servants of a tyrannical regime. On the other side, many rabidly loyalist groups distrusted the Jedi in equal measure. After all, many said, was not Count Dooku a former Jedi himself? The Jedi did not help their case by refusing to connect Dooku with violent Separatist attacks, even when the Confederate head of state refused to condemn the attacks done in his name. Bombings on Coruscant continued, seemingly at random. Over the course of the Separatist crisis, the galactic government on Coruscant continued to prove ineffective. The Financial Reform Act was initiated as a response to the Raxus address and aimed to combat corruption in the Senate. However, after the assassination of one of the bill's chief proponents, the vote was indefinitely postponed. This spurred even more secessions and seemed to confirm Dooku's claims. Chief among those secessions were those of Andor and Cy Mirth. Both brought hundreds of systems with them, bringing the total of Confederate member worlds above 6,000. Andor, however, became the center of yet another civil war in short order. The Andoan Free Colonies, in opposition to the militaristic Spivarelda government, refused to acknowledge Andor's secession, and a bloody civil war began. The Andoan Civil War lasted for 3 years and would be a microcosm for the conflict brewing outside. The CIS would often be remembered in later years as having a backbone of major corporations, but in truth, none of these openly backed Dooku until shortly before the Battle of Geonosis. However, in secret, their leaders conspired and built up massive droid armies nonetheless, and manipulated worlds into secession. The Republic would not discover this until it was far too late. One of these manipulated worlds was Ancion. A backwater grassy planet in a remote part of the Rim, Ancion seemed to have nothing significant about it, but not to the Confederacy. Shu Mei, the president of the Commerce Guild, pointed out to Count Dooku something about Ancion that had previously gone unnoticed. Ancion was the nexus of a complicated net of treaties ranging from the Malarian Alliance to the Kachimite Mutual Military Treaty, meaning its secession would bring 40-odd major worlds into the Confederate fold and potentially more besides. Shu Mei managed to unite the scattered Ancion clans into a separatist coalition, but the Republic sent Jedi to stop it. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luminara Unduli with their Padawans, Anakin Skywalker and Barriss Offee, were sent to Ancion to settle the dispute and keep the planet in the Republic. They were ultimately successful, a bright spot for the Republic, but merely a distraction from the storm massing in the galaxy at large. By the time of the mission to Ancion, the Confederacy was composed of more than 10,000 star systems, with the number rapidly growing each day. In the Galactic Senate, militarism spread, and soon a Military Creation Act was put forward, which would recreate the Republic military. Many senators opposed it, including Bail Organa of Alderaan, Mon Mothma of Chandrila, and Padme Amidala of Naboo. But when Senator Amidala arrived on Coruscant to vote against the act, her Star Cruiser was bombed, killing dozens of Naboo personnel and prompting the Supreme Chancellor to put her under the protection of 2 Jedi, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. The assassin tried again that night, but after a high-speed chase was caught by the Jedi. The bounty hunter responsible, Zam Wesell, was shot before she could give up her employer by a man in a suit of Mandalorian armor. While his apprentice took Amidala to Naboo to be guarded more securely, Kenobi attempted to find the identity of the armored man who shot Wesell. After pinpointing the origin of the dart used to kill Zam, he tracked the man to Kamino, a remote wild space world above the galactic plane. What he discovered there changed the history of the galaxy forever. Shortly before the Battle of Naboo, a Jedi Master, known as Sifo Dyas, had a vision of a war that would split the Republic in 2. At the urging of his close friend, Master Dooku, Sifo Dyas had travelled to Kamino and placed an order for a massive clone army to be grown for the Jedi over the course of 10 years. He said the army was for the Republic. But Dooku, operating under the name of Darth Tyrannus, had Sifo Dyas killed and took over the project. He selected Jango Fett for the job of Clone Template, a Mandalorian bounty hunter whom he had met on Galdran years prior. Fett accepted, demanding that he would receive a high salary and that he would receive the first clone with no genetic tampering to raise as a son. The Kaminoans agreed, and he named his new son Boba. 10 years later, Obi-Wan Kenobi entered Topoka City to find that the first batch of clones was ready. The Kaminoans had grown a massive army, with 2,000 units ready and 1 million more on the way. Though Kenobi assumed units to mean individual clones, the Jedi later learned that it actually referred to platoons, and that the army totaled more than 40 million clones, with many more to come. Kenobi reported this to the Jedi Council, who found the report disturbing. Sifo Dyas had never been commanded to place the order, and never discussed it with any of them. Kenobi was then taken to meet Jango Fett, and identified him as the man who had killed Zam Wesell. Recognizing the Jedi from a few nights before, Jango and Boba immediately prepared to leave Kamino. Though they were able to escape Kenobi and Jango's ship, Slave 1, the Jedi had planted a tracking device on it. Kenobi then proceeded to follow the Fetts to Geonosis. On Geonosis, Dooku had at last gathered the heads of the large corporations that had come to support him, and officially organized the CIS. The beings present, several senators, and the heads of the Trade Federation, Techno Union, Banking Clan, Commerce Guild, Corporate Alliance, Geonosian Industries, Hypercommunications Cartel, Quarren Isolation League, became the Separatist Council, and pulled their droid armies into a vast fighting force, which was being expanded in the catacomb factories below. The CIS was now a powerful military threat. Obi-Wan Kenobi reported these findings to the Jedi Council, but was captured by Geonosian guards, as were secret lovers Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala, who attempted to follow and rescue him. As all three faced death in a Geonosian execution arena, the Jedi reported their findings to the Senate. 212 Jedi, led by Mace Windu, departed for Geonosis to rescue the trio. Back on Coruscant, the vote for the Military Creation Act was interrupted by the news of Dooku's actions on Geonosis. The stunned senators quickly voted to give more emergency powers to the Supreme Chancellor. Palpatine accepted with seeming reluctance, and immediately created a Grand Army of the Republic. Jedi Grandmaster Yoda departed to collect the clone army from Kamino, and took nearly 200,000 troopers to Geonosis. There they found that Windu's rescue had gone badly. Only 30 Jedi remained, and they were surrounded by massive hordes of Separatist battle droids. With little time to lose, Yoda ordered the clones to land and create a perimeter around the survivors, spiriting them out of the arena before landing en masse in the wide flats outside to combat the already deployed droid army. The Battle of Geonosis kicked into high gear, and the open war had begun. The Battle of Geonosis was a Republic victory, but an incomplete one. The entire Separatist Council escaped, as well as Count Dooku and most of the Confederacy's military leaders. Anakin Skywalker had lost a hand in the battle, and many Jedi lost their lives. Vast numbers of battle droids escaped aboard corporate warships. Geonosis was in Republic hands, but only in name and on the surface. In the catacombs below, the Geonosians schemed to take back their world. The Separatists claimed Raxus Secundus as its capital, and moved the Separatist parliament to it. Severance Tan, Dooku's favoured general, was made Supreme Chancellor of the massive force that was the new Confederate military. The Republic brought in the first 3 million clone troopers of its order immediately and sent them off aboard assault ships to early battlefronts. Only one thing was certain: the Clone Wars had just begun.